This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
What's that old saying? When it rains, it pours. When crap hits the fan, boy does it hit with force. Actually, I think I just made that one up. Well, anyway, I'm just a little scatterbrained right now. I'm currently needed for about a gazillion different things at work, and that's stretched across all three of my main gigs. I'm rarely ever needed for the third one, and of course when I am, it's when I have other stuff that I'm trying to balance out with it. And it's usually my day off. That's life, you know? Anyway, I'm probably going to end up getting this one up a little bit later than normal because I'm probably going to go in to help out a little bit. So if you don't see this one uploaded until way later in the afternoon or, God, at this rate, even the early evening, don't be shocked. I mean, I only have Fridays in my availability to really take the time to edit and work on these shows. So I'm stretched a little thin with time windows. Like I said, it's the reason I try to give myself Fridays off so I can actually do stuff. Real life stuff. Such as complaining about how bad modern wrestling is. Because, you know, that's fun, right? I just realized I forgot to turn off the fan in the other room. I hope that doesn't come across too loud in the audio. This might be one of those shows where it's just a nightmare to edit and piece everything together. Kind of like how watching Dynamite was fun this week. I'm totally kidding. It never is. Before I go into all that, if you are watching the show for the first time, make sure to subscribe, comment, like. I do not do enough channel plugs, so I want to make sure I do that in case any stragglers or new eyeballs catch the gimmick of the channel and they want to come back for more punishment every week. We're also on Rumble, in addition to YouTube, Mondays and Fridays. It's been a tradition on this channel for the last 2.5 years. Actually, I think 3 at this point. If I actually go back and look when we first started the comeback ride. 3 years. Whew. That's a long time. At least for me to be doing it consistently. I've had a reputation for being a little on and off with things. But like I said, this one might go up a little later because of some last minute curveballs that got thrown at me. All good though. At least I'm getting paid. So with that, let's do this show. Whatever this fucking show is called. Does it even matter at this point? There we go. I was distracted because I had the wrong notes up. I think I just pulled up a random document for Collision. What the hell date was that for? Oh, that was last week. Okay. Am I going to keep that in the editing? I probably am. Just so you know what it's like for me doing this live. God, 2.5 years, 3 years, and I still can't get my crap straight. Kind of sounds like Tony Khan trying to format a wrestling program. Especially this Wednesday night calamity. It is amazing how little information I actually retain the minute these shows are over. And my God, if you only saw my notes. I should screen cap them sometimes so you can just look at my Word documents. All the bullet points and the jumbled mess of words and sentence fragments that go on. And that's just me trying to keep track of all the bullshit happening on my screen at a given time. Probably looks like a Russo writing format from the Wednesday Night Wars. I spell everything wrong because I can't type fast enough to follow half this dog shite. Anyway, I'm rambling. I want to try to get through this dumpster fire as quickly as humanly possible, so let's try to make this the 5-minute Dynamite rundown. Even though I know for a fact it won't be. So the Jag-Off Asshole Society opened things up in the ring. I believe the masked freak on commentary referred to it as a mandatory meeting. And of course, it's all the job guys who are standing in the ring with dick in hand. All so they can give Jericho the special ring entrance. Because, you know, gotta let everybody know who the real star of the group is. Plus, you gotta let all the talentless music hacks in the crowd do the sing-alongs. God, that's gotta be the worst theme music in wrestling history. And, well, this whole segment pretty much went as I anticipated it would. Let's see, when did this group officially form? It was like early 2022, right? Okay, so it's been around for well over a year. And it only took every single person associated about 1.5 years to realize, yeah, you know what? We're really not gaining anything out of being part of this group. It's all about boosting Jericho's ego. None of us are better off for having been a part of it. None of us are any more or less over/relevant than we were before being part of the JAS. So, yeah, we're pretty much done. Garcia walked off. Hager walked off. Hopefully Tony Khan ripped up his contract and shoved it down his throat as he was walking by Gorilla. Hope we never see that Sylvester the Cat sissy ever again. What a waste of time and money that guy was. Gotta be honest, the girls were probably the highlight of the whole thing. Not because anything they said was true. And Ty Conti promising that after she gives birth, she's going to come back and be a megastar. Highly doubt that'll ever happen. Anna Jay standing there talking about how she doesn't need the JAS to win the women's world title because she's going to do it on her own against Hikaru Shida tonight. Spoiler, Anna Jay did not win the women's belt later on. So she immediately ate her words. But they were at least feisty and bitchy. They showed more emotion than bland-ass Jay Hager and Daniel Garcia did. And of course, you can't forget Cool Hand Luke and Matty Mini-Dick overacting to the point where it's just cringe. And then in the flattest payoff imaginable, Sammy Guevara, the last recruitment standing, he looks at Jericho. He tells him that he's loyal. He's never going to walk off on Jericho like everybody else just did. So, of course, 5 seconds later, he proceeds to walk off on Chris Jericho. This was, I don't know. Is melodramatic a pretty fitting term? Not that I really gave two shits about what happened to the Jag-Off Asshole Society. I just kind of figured it would dissipate into the ether and never be spoken of again. The fact that they spent the first 10 minutes of the show dragging this middle school drama out, on top of the fact that it was staged and phony as fuck. I mean, the only thing I can hope for is that this will signify the end of most of these goofballs ever getting major pushes on television. Cut the cord on Garcia, Hager, Mac Daddy, and Cool Hand. Maybe keep the girls around for eye candy purposes, because they do have nice racks. They're visually appealing to look at. I mean, Sammy Guevara, I guess you eventually have to do the blow-off with him and Jericho, so keep him around for collateral damage. But yeah, what a group. What a faction. Glad to know that everybody benefited from being associated with it. And then apparently Jericho's going to give Donnie Dipshit his answer next week if he'll join the First Family or not. Or whatever Callus's faction is. The faction that basically consists of him and Take a Shit. What a crew. And then we went from that to this completely random Hardy Boys versus Beta Bucks tag match. Completely unadvertised from the week prior. Correct me if I'm wrong. Not that I pay all that close attention to the Elite's ongoing TV feuds. Didn't these guys have a major pay-per-view match at one point? Wasn't that something that people were genuinely intrigued with seeing? When they first signed Jeff to AEW like a year and a half ago? Was him and Matt teaming up to have one final big match with the cosplay Hardy Boys? Now all of a sudden, they're just doing the rematch on free television completely at random with zero hype and promotional tactic. That sounds like a very AEW thing to do. Not that promoting it would have really done the match quality any favors. Maybe it was smart to keep this one under the radar. Jesus H. Christ. Jeff Hardy, dude. You know, I really hate to be that guy. Because even if I was never personally the biggest Hardy Boys fan growing up, I am at least willing to acknowledge how instrumental they were to the business as a tag team when they were in their prime. And that's the key phrase, in their prime. We've seen the ups and downs with Jeff and Matt over the years, both their wrestling careers and their personal lives. With Jeff, that rabbit hole goes a lot deeper when it comes to the substance issues. They've been through a lot. But aside from all the health complications and the personal tribulations, the bottom line is that these guys are shells of their former selves. They're slow, they're old, they're beat up, their bodies just don't move the same way anymore. They can't physically keep up, especially not with these fucking romping room jack-offs. I mean, this match sucked, but in particular, Jeff Hardy was really fucking bad here. Mistiming spots and screwing up shit left and right. Anytime he bumps or does anything physical, he just looks like he's about to break into a million pieces. And Matt's not looking too well himself these days, but with Jeff, my God, it just stands out. Now, granted, working with Matt and Jeff basically handcuffs the Beta Bucks into having to slow everything down on purpose to at least try to work a semi-normal pace for once. Doesn't make up for the fact that there's still no ring psychology to anything they do. They still just randomly hit double team moves with no tags and the ref stands around and doesn't do anything. So even slower Bucks ring style has no form of logic or coherency to it. Anyway, the Bucks won with the BTE trigger. I really have nothing else to add. Sloppy, all over the map. The Hardys look like shit because they're old. The Bucks look like shit because they suck and have no idea how to work. It was something they kept billing as a dream match, even though nobody gave a shit, and more than likely did nothing to pop a rating. Because, of course, the idiots involved didn't bother advertising it beforehand. So no one cared. It wasn't even the main event. It was just shoehorned in the middle of the show. Nor did anybody really care about the post-match stuff, which is kind of telling in a lot of ways, if you really wanted to take the time to read into it. basically what happened is the Bucks were about to answer FTR's challenge for the match at All In. And here come FTR in person to, I guess, confront the Bucks to try to get that initial crowd reaction with the teams actually facing off for the first time in God knows how long. I think most people are well attuned to the ongoing bad blood. They know about the whole Punk versus Elite drama, at least to a degree. And FTR are firmly in the Punk camp, I can tell you that for sure. So, I mean, in a way, you knew there would be at least some kind of tension when the teams eventually faced off again. And then we got the confrontation. And is it fair to say it was a piss-warm reaction from the people? There were like 8 people that tried to start a "This is awesome" chant, which died a rancid death. They didn't even say anything. They just stood there and looked at each other. And the fans either just sat there on their hands or did very polite golf claps. So that's basically what the American audience thinks about FTR versus the Bucks 3. Now we just wait to see if the UK crowd has any different opinion. But again, that was really fucking telling. The fact that after all that wait, after they dragged their feet through the mud forever to actually give us the rubber match, back when FTR were white hot about a year and a half ago, people were really clamoring to see that third match. Go back and watch my videos. How many times was I sitting here on the Dynamite Report saying, book the match, Tony. Do it. It's the right timing. Pull the trigger. Do it before it's too late. Before it loses steam. But no. Nah, of course, the Bucks do the job in the second match. And they made sure to immediately politic their way out of having to do a third job. Because, you know, the timing was right. God forbid they would ever have to accept the fact that they're the inferior tag team. That Dax and Cash are more over and better workers than they are. Nope. The Bucks decided it would be better for business to go play with their friends in the Goofy Trios division and not draw money for the company. As a result, leaving FTR to piss in the wind for like a year straight with jack all of shit to do and zero compelling people to feud with. And it totally killed their momentum. Just derailed them entirely. So here we are. It's a year or so later, more than that. Now they've decided, now would probably be a good time to go to the rubber match. And now the question remains, is it too little too late? Has the ship already sailed on that experiment? Did they miss their window? I think they did. Now, of course, the UK fans are probably going to enjoy it. But after seeing what happened here in Dayton, Ohio, a lot of the people really didn't seem to care one way or the other. So it's up to the UK market to save it. It's going to be really fascinating. I'll tell you something I didn't care to see. MJF committing acts of borderline child abuse at trampoline parks. Yeah, that was the thing that happened on live national cable television. In another one of those over-the-top cartoony Adam Cole MJF skits, MJF pelted dodgeballs at minors. Not making that up. Because apparently he was mad that Adam Cole didn't want to come bang some chicks with him at clubs. You know what, actually, now that I think of it, I'd have probably lashed out at some 8-year-olds too. It's also very assuring to see young girls get programmed into thinking that flipping off grown adult men is a good idea. Glad to know she'll grow up to be a lovely, mature woman. Yeah, this was fucking dumb. Not gonna lie. Try to give this MJF Adam Cole comedy sketch stuff a chance. Now I'm just kind of fed up with it and fed up with both of them, if I'm being blunt. There's a certain threshold of how far you can believably push the boundaries with a lot of this stuff. We've now reached the point with these guys where I'm sick of the comedy, and I just want to see somebody fuck the other guy over and be done with it. I don't even care who it is. I'm ready for the blow-off. They've completely gone off the rails with this thing, and not in a good way. This is some of the worst stuff MJF's been involved with in Lord knows how long. Probably since the Jericho feud, because that stuff was really fucking bad too. And of course, this was only a precursor for what was to come later on. It's amazing how that works. They've actually managed to get me to not care about MJF stuff on television. How does that happen? Well, before we get to that cataclysm, we have to talk about this cataclysm first. Jungle Jackass versus Bob Van Dam for the FTW Championship. And it's FTW rules. Which is literally just their way of saying hardcore rules, anything goes. Because, you know, can't go more than 1 week without getting some kind of no DQ match on AEW television. They just got to beat that stipulation into powder. So, yeah, honestly, where to even begin with this one? Well, first of all, I'll say this. If you have not already, take a moment, 5 minutes at the most, go listen to my review of last week's show when they actually introduced BVD as part of the whole ECW equation. If you want to hear my 15-minute tirade on how much I always despised Rob's work and thought he was overrated as fuck, you can go get a general breakdown of that. I'm not going to reiterate that talking point here. If you've ever seen a Bob Van Dam match in your life, be it ECW, WWF, TNA, whatever promotion you've happened to stumble upon seeing Rob's work, it's the same match every time. He has like 5 or 6 go-to moves. Most of them either look sloppy or botched. The most impressive thing he does is probably the monkey flip spot out of the corner, and a lot of that comes from the guy taking the move, being sure to cooperate and help assist in launching himself into the air. Of course, when you throw Plunder into the mix, it's already an immediate turnoff for me. I see guys bump through tables and fall into chairs every week on this show. So this is no different than any other AEW hardcore match I've ever seen in the last 3 or 4 years. This was actually tame by comparison to most. And the most ironic part, when all was said and done here, neither Bob Van Dam or Jungle Jackass even took the worst of the beating here. Fucking Bryce Remsburg, dude. That guy got waffled with a chair right between the eyes. Didn't even bother throwing his hands up to protect himself. Jungle Boy heaves a chair at Rob as hard as he possibly could. Of course, RVD's supposed to duck it, and he does. And that chair went square into Bryce's face. I don't even know how this was possible, but somehow the chair wound up getting stuck between the second and top rope with the legs sticking out. So in other words, it is entirely probable that the chair legs could have caught Bryce in the face too. And that would have been the end of that guy's in-ring career as we knew it. By the way, not that I even really need to talk about it, if you're wondering how the weapons just randomly got involved in the match, I have no clue. They came back from break, and there was just a random table set up on the floor, about 4 or 5 chairs hanging out in the ring. Probably just casually pulled them out from under the ring during picture-in-picture when I wasn't paying attention. Like I said, all of Rob's shit always looks phony to begin with. So seeing him do it now in his late 40s when he's slower and broken down makes everything look more ridiculous. Rob did a very mediocre looking frog splash for a visual 3. Of course, Aubrey came down to try and count the pin, but Jack kicked out at 2. And then something else happened. I don't remember. All I know is Jungle Boy rammed Rob's head into a chair that was propped up in the corner. Again, no idea how it was set up or when it was mentioned. So apparently it wasn't important enough, even though it directly factored into the finish. They also nearly killed Bryce a second time by basically running toward him while he was dead on the ground selling. I was sure they stepped on him at least twice. And then Jungle Boy stacked up Rob and pinned him by pulling the trunks. And then Rob completely no-sold it, as he always had a tendency to do throughout his career whenever he wasn't going over. Just blows it off and pretends like he didn't care. Because he's a fucking unprofessional dickwad and always was. And that was it. Hopefully that was a one-off so I never have to talk about Bob Van Dam on this channel ever again. He easily ranks among my least favorite professional wrestlers of all time. He's right up there with the likes of Randy Orton and Triple H in terms of guys that I always thought were incredibly overhyped and overvalued. Can't believe people actually ever thought that guy was good. And at the end of the day, I know what you're probably all thinking. You astute-minded people out there. What purpose did this exactly serve? It's a good question. I do not have an answer. It did virtually nothing for Jack Perry. All he did was bump and sell for all of Bob's horrible offense until he went with a cheap roll-up. And it was a garbage match at that, so it didn't do anybody any favors. I just thought it was a waste of time and effort. Jungle Boy's heel shtick is not clicking. The ECW tribute was never going to get over. This is all just a Tony Khan wet dream fantasy coming to the forefront because he watched some old tapes and decided, yeah, now would be a good time to rehash some old ECW faves. See if we can pop a number out of desperation. And you know what? If it worked, good on them. I'm happy for them. It's a short-term band-aid to fix what's an ongoing open laceration that's hindering their television program. But that's something Tony doesn't want to hear because it doesn't suit the narrative that we're supposed to sit here and try to pretend like everything's all good with AEW, despite all evidence to the contrary with the lack of any real substantial growth in their product. Because they're doing shit like this in 2023. Rehashing ECW angles. Because TNA did that over a decade ago and it went to shit in a hurry. So naturally, Tony Khan's going to try it here 10 years later. What a dope. Anyway, I'm about ready to move on. So this is where we got the MJF Adam Cole segment. They were, well, this is weird. The pay-per-view match is Adam Cole versus MJF for the AEW World title. They're going to be opponents in approximately 2 or 3 weeks from this point. Yet they're still coming out together with the mashed up entrance music. So they're still friends. But there's no tension. But they are going to be wrestling each other. Just want to throw that out there in case anybody else is confused as to what the fuck's going on. So, they come out to do the promo. Totally no-selling the fact that just several segments prior, MJF was caught on camera pelting minors with dodgeballs. Never mind that potential lawsuit. Now we're just immediately changing gears and focusing on the Wembley show, paying no attention to that other suspect programming. And of course, Max is out there pandering to the crowd. It's probably the most lively the people were up to this point in the show. So credit to MJF for being able to be the first guy to wake these people up and get them to actually give a fuck about anything. And Adam Cole interjects, tried to talk about wrestling for the AEW World Championship, which somehow prompts MJF into thinking that Cole wanted to do a promo battle with him. So he immediately starts making fun of Cole's physique, facetiously. But that's like the main go-to insult when it comes to talking about Adam Cole, is his physical conditioning. But no, Cole basically tells MJF that while he's focused on wanting to become the AEW World Champion, he also has his eyes set on other gold. Because he doesn't want to let the tag team go yet. He still wants tag gold. And while they came up short in their match with FTR a couple weeks back, there is another set of tag belts in this company that Cole was interested in going after. So in the land of AEW, that widens his options to about 12 different sets of tag belts, depending on what company he's talking about. Now, specifically, Cole was interested in going after the Ring of Honor World Tag Team Championships. The only set of ROH belts that Cole never held during his tenure with the company years ago. And while he's running down all the prestigious teams that held the ROH tag belts, Kings of Wrestling, the Briscoes, etc. Sad that Benjamin and Haas did not get a plug there. That was like peak ROH during the late 2000s era. 2008, 2009. Even like 2010 and 2011 were pretty good at certain points. Man. I wish I would have been smart enough to DVR a lot of those shows back in the day. I took them for granted. Compared to what I see now on television these days, Christ almighty. ROH had its flaws, but man, in comparison to Dynamite, I should have saved some of those shows back in the day. One of my biggest regrets. Anyway, so, well, the main point is, that match will be taking place on the 0 hour, which might have been the only time in history that I recall anybody actually plugging the pre-show match for an AEW pay-per-view. And of course, MJF's involved. And after spending about 5 minutes talking about the Ring of Honor World Tag Titles, the importance of the Ring of Honor World Tag Titles, the significance of what it would mean for Adam Cole and MJF to become the Ring of Honor World Tag Team Champions, are you noticing a pattern here? You picking up on the issue? The fact that it took them until the final 8 seconds to actually acknowledge who the actual fucking ROH Tag Champions are? Did anyone actually know who the Ring of Honor World Tag Team Champions were prior to MJF saying the names Aussie Open? Now, of course, I instantly heard Aussie Open and groaned. Because, you know, it's Aussie Open. You may as well better know them as Will Ospreay's flunkies. I don't even know their fucking names offhand. That's how irrelevant they've been in the overall scope of this company. No, but that's not the important thing in this situation because, I mean, that match will probably end up being some kind of angle that ties in with the actual world title match. The whole thing with Roddy Strong coming out here at the end and doing the whole soap opera, middle school drama, you know, pretending to be all upset that Adam Cole is choosing MJF over him as a tag partner. I mean, the whole thing was so obviously staged. In the way where you can obviously tell that a swerve's coming. I mean, when you got Roddy turning around and going to hug Bennett and Taven while they're standing there consoling him, you know, but you never actually see Roddy's face while he has his back turned. Is it not clear as day that Adam Cole is secretly in on all this? I don't know. Maybe it was just Roddy Strong's delivery. I mean, the guy's never been known for being the most charismatic guy on the stick. It was just so overly theatrical. Like, what do they call it? Like cable access level bad. To the point where you just don't buy any of it and you're just left shaking your head when it's over. That's what I thought after I saw all that go down. It's the same shit I complain about with the Elite's childish dramatic storytelling. It's why I skip most of their segments, because it's so bad. The acting is hideous, and the storytelling is atrocious. That's what all this stuff was with Roddy and Cole here. It was two grown adult men behaving like teenage girls, fighting over who gets singled out of the friend group. So dumb. Are they not aware that real men do not act like this? Do they understand that real men do not behave like this in real normal conversations? If there's an issue between dudes, if there's a beef, do you know what they do? Well, I'll tell you what they don't do. They don't cry about it like fucking pussies. They fight. They bleed. They make up. They shake hands. They grab a beer. Simple. You know, with the way Roddy's been interacting in this whole story, at this point, if it doesn't turn out that Cole's secretly in cahoots with him, Bennett, and Taven, I'll be genuinely shocked. I mean, the MJF heel swerve was the obvious expectation when they started this program, you know, but he's hamming up the over-the-top smart-ass babyface antics. At one point, I would have been convinced that it was MJF that was going to turn. But the Adam Cole turn would probably be the better option to go with if they want to make sure they don't outright bury the way him and Roddy have been interacting on television in the last month. I've been saying, the worst case scenario coming out of this is to make Adam Cole look like a fucking dipshit. If it turns out that MJF's the one that screws him over, then Adam Cole's just going to look like a stupid babyface. So I think at this point, it's got to be Cole that turns. But the way they're going about getting there is just... It's not how I would have gone about booking it. I know they still have a couple weeks before the big clash, but this all just kind of put into perspective why I prefer classic wrestling angles. Back when you had actual adult men behaving and working like grown-ass dudes. Is it really that hard? We should get away from this sissy material, this modernized soy boy attitude that all the squishy men are portraying these days on camera. It's not just professional wrestling, it's just entertainment television in general. The feminization of men. It's so fucking annoying. So then we had a Lucha Fucks versus BCC match, if you can even call it that. Hard to tell whenever Jon Moxley's involved because all his shit looks horrible and barely ever pertains to anything involving wrestling. The match went forever and the BCC won. That is all I have to say. At some point after a couple video pre-tapes, we also had a promo segment with the Mogul Embassy, Darby Allin, and Sting. And there was some more 15 to 20 year backstory drama they tried to splice in there, where Darby's out there preaching to AR Fox about how he lived with him for years when they were financially broke and barely able to feed themselves, living in their cars. Shit that nobody else would know about unless you went out of your way to research the friendship ties between Darby Allin and AR fucking Fox. Does anybody give a crap? No, of course not. Unless you're a mark. And the whole thing culminated with Sting returning and basically issuing a challenge for All In. Okay. I presume the match is Darby and Sting versus Swerve and Fox. Cool. Good to know there will at least be one match that I skip out on. I wonder what stupid, dangerous bump Sting's going to try and take this time. What, is he going to dive off the overhang on the roof and try a frog splash? Through a flaming table? With shards of glass and thumbtacks everywhere? Well, that's Sting for you. Try to reinvent the wheel at the ripe age of 60 whatever he is. Always trying to innovate himself. Because we all know that's what Sting loves to do. That's what apparently he's interested in doing these days. Because he's got to be in touch. He's got to make sure he vibes with the young kids. And you're not going to stop him. May God be with him. And may God be with the people that actually stuck around to watch that main event this week. All 300,000 people that decided to put themselves to the torture of having to witness Hikaru Shida versus Anna Jay. Seriously? Did you think I was actually going to bother? What planet are you living on? My time is valuable. I just figured the reason they main evented the women again was Tony Khan presuming that most people already tuned the show out by now after the Adam Cole MJF stuff. So he just said, fuck it. No one's watching in the last 45 minutes anyway. Just throw the girls out there. If we already didn't run off the entire audience by now, those remaining viewers will stick around to watch anything. And shock of all shocks, after Anna Jay promised that she would make history tonight by beating Shida by herself without the help or influence from Chris Jericho, guess what happened? Yup. She lost. Clean. So way to go, Anna Jay. You're the geek of the century. And by the way, they're apparently doing some really overly convoluted tournament with the girls right now. I had no idea what was going on, but I guess they're doing a bunch of singles matches with the winners that are going to go on to All In to wrestle in a four-way or something for Shida's belt. Because, sure. Why not? I guess Tony was watching SmackDown the other week when WWE was doing the same thing with the U.S. title tournament. Except I think here the booking is the opposite. Because I think all the prelim matches were four-ways and then the final round was a singles match with WWE. This time, it's prelim singles matches with the final round being a four-way. Or something like that. I don't know. Maybe if you have trouble trying to explain something coherently, perhaps the idea is a little too complex. It's like me trying to explain the roles and stipulations for Russo's booking. Maybe I need to get a sound drop of Mike Tenay saying, "It's really quite simple." I mean, if there's one thing that does not describe Tony Khan's booking, it's simple. Scatterbrained? Yes. Convoluted? Yes. Simple? Hell no. Absolutely not. And I'm just repeating old verbiage at this point, but it's the recurring problem with Dynamite every single week. There's no regularity to anything we see. Random shit happens. It's impossible to remember who's on what side, who's mad at who, what's going on, how things tie together, why anything matters. The presumption is we're watching all 50 things that AEW is doing in a given week on whatever show. The poor saps that actually sit there and decide to watch Rampage or fucking Ring of Honor. But I really am preaching to the choir now, aren't I? How long have I been doing that? Nothing new really being covered here on my end. I'm just reporting the same shit every week. And you know, it's kind of amazing the imbalance that's currently going on with AEW's fan base. The cult elitists versus just the casual, rational-minded viewers. The ones that sit there and watch a show every week and think, what the fuck is happening? Why is this happening? What are they doing here? Where's this going? Where did that come from? Those people, we know what to expect. And then there's the AEW marks, that little group of fans that just love everything they see on this show. And it's weird. The bipolar nature of those fans versus regular wrestling fans. We're just on two completely different pages. Seriously, go read reports. Go look at comments on videos. It really is a bipolar nature. The people that are in the tank for AEW solely, they love this shit. They are so into this. This nonsensical weekly crash TV booking. It's amazing. And those are probably the same people that bitched and griped about how bad the Attitude Era was because nothing ever made sense. To be fair, they're probably not wrong. We haven't reached the Attitude Era with my Retro Raw reports yet, but we're only a few years out from it. I'm sure when I go back and watch a lot of those shows, I'll be saying, yeah, a lot of this stuff was really bad. But you know what? It was probably a lot better than what we're seeing in AEW. Because at least the Attitude Era had stars. And the star power that's on this show right now on Dynamite, it is few and far between. I will tell you that. All right, so it's been like almost a full week since I watched this episode. With the hectic weekend, I knew it was going to be hard for me to try and watch this one on either Sunday or Monday, which is usually when I have time to watch the Crockett shows. But the SummerSlam and Collision shows kind of put the kibosh on that. So I watched the show last Saturday afternoon. I'm trying my best to recall everything I watched off the top of my head as I'm reading over my notes again. You'll have to excuse me if I pause a time or two and say, yeah, I don't remember that happening, or wait, when did that actually occur? I'll do my best to retain as much information as I can. It's why I take notes. But even so, my brain shuts off occasionally while I'm watching these things. It's been a few days. I'll do my best. But don't run me up the flagpole if I have a few brain farts along the way. Now, I do remember how they finished last week's show. I don't think I can ever forget the classic brawl angle with Ricky Morton and Tully Blanchard, where Tully kicked out of a flash roll-up in a non-sanctioned televised match. I was pissed when they didn't re-air that spot. It's that moment in the Ricky slapping Tully across the face moment. Two memorable spots where Tully legitimately looked like he wanted to beat the living tar out of this fucker. Great TV moment. And of course, they cut back to the booth, and there's Tony and David. They are laughing their asses off. Rewatching that footage back, remembering how awesome it was. And of course, they're doing their regular rundowns of the show like they always do, talking about all the top stars that we're going to see on today's program. And I was fixing to get excited because David and Tony are looking at each other. And David's like, Tony, You ready for some great ring action? And with a big old grin, Tony goes, oh yes, I'm ready. And I'm sitting there salivating, rubbing my hands together thinking, oh, this is going to be great. Can't wait to see what top stars we have on today's program. Man, they're really making the show out to be an all-time banger. And then they cut to the ring. The opening match. Sean Royal versus George South. I wish I could have captured my facial expression the moment they went from David and Tony hyping up the show to the moment they cut to the ring and showed the graphic that read, Sean Royal versus George South. You know those old cartoons where you'll see the slow, dramatic mouth drooping from a smirk to a frown? That is what I looked like during this transition. For about 3 seconds, I was stoked to see some great ring action. And this is what they threw at me to start the show. I talk about ribbing. This was the ultimate rib. Now again, I do not want to sit here and cruelly disparage Sean Royal. I'm sure he was a nice guy. I know his career was very short-lived. I also understand this was probably a difficult time for him because his partner, Chris Champion, literally just got into a car accident not too long before this. But my God, this guy sucked. On top of the fact that the nude breed gimmick was death TV, absolutely foul on every level, neither of them were ever particularly good workers. The ring gear was hideous. It's always a red flag when the job guy shows up and he's the supremely better worker than the guy they're trying to put over. As God is my witness, George South at one point was working over Royal's leg in a submission hold. The people were audibly chanting, "Beat him up, George, beat him up." To George South, the enhancement guy. That was the moment it was time to hang up the boots and call it quits. Sean Royal was doomed from then on. Royal completely whiffed a dropkick. They tried to hide it with a camera cut. It was clear he came nowhere close to making contact with South. There were some Boy Scout troops in the front row this week. Watching their facials during Sean Royal's offense, it's hard to describe whether their faces read boredom or complete ambivalence. They just sat there. No facial expression. So South made a comeback. He missed a crossbody attack out of the corner. And then Sean Royal went up to hit a diving knee stomp for the 3. And they were sure to zoom the camera all the way in this time so we did not see Royal completely miss the finish like last time. A bad start to the show. And then we immediately went over to the booth for a Ric Flair promo. And you'll be shocked to hear, but he really had nothing to say. Well, it's not like he didn't say anything. But it was a very paint-by-numbers Nature Boy promo. Promised one of the girls in the front row that he would visit her at the Marriott later on. And then he basically went into a spiel about how he goes to bed every night clutching his world title, relishing in the fact that he's rich and famous. And meanwhile, there's this Ronnie Garvin fella that's riding his tail, giving him all kinds of problems. And he promised later in the show He would prove why he's a champion, and Garvin is nothing more than a challenger. Quite the insult. And then we came back for Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard versus Larry Stevens and Rocky King. We also had JJ at the booth to do some color. Here, I think, is where he mentioned that he suffered a legit shoulder injury in the War Games match at the Omni. And they aired the replay of that on television a few weeks back. And I remember it. The one where the Road Warriors gave JJ some kind of modified doomsday device. And JJ took that really nasty flip bump and landed right on his shoulder. And apparently they were not working that shoulder injury. That was legit. He really got hurt taking that bump. And I even remember saying when I saw it, that did not look fun. Looked kind of serious. Well, turns out I was right. But he did inform us that the tables have now turned because there was an incident that occurred in Miami not too long ago. And now Paul Ellering has his arm in a sling, suffering a broken arm or a bum shoulder. I can't remember which one. I believe that would have been the second War Games, though, if I'm not mistaken. Because I know they were plugging the second War Games match in Florida right after the first one in Atlanta. So I'm guessing that's where the injury angle took place. So anyway, the Horsemen beat up Rocky and Larry. On the scale of most Horseman massacres, this was very tame. They did a number on Larry right toward the finish before Arn won with the Gourd Buster. I'm guessing they were fans of Rocky King because he was only in there for about a minute before he tagged out to Larry, and he never got back in. Arn and Tully probably said, "Yeah, Rocky's a good enough athlete. But this Larry Stevens guy, no, he sucks. We must beat the shit out of him." And they did. That they did. And then we go back to ringside with Arn, Tully, and JJ. Tully basically talked about how the Rock and Roll Express, in addition to wanting Tully and Arn for the World Tag Belts, they also want to challenge Tully for the World Television title. And he talked about how he's been a defending champion since day one. Never really gave a nay or yay answer as to whether or not he would accept the Rock and Roll Challenge. But it sounds like Ricky might be in line for a title shot after last week's brawl. And then Arn did another one of his passionate, "The Horsemen are awesome" rants. Ran down all the things that make the Horsemen superior to every athlete. And when it comes to Arn's role in the group, he says that he's been viewed as the giving guy in the team. He's been a charitable family man, for lack of better terms. Kind of humorous, although not entirely untrue. But now Arn is done with giving. Now it's time to do some taking. And that's going to come in the form of the World Tag Belts. Gotta say, the Horsemen promos were rather subpar. At least this week. I think this was one of those go out there and say some words week. They were sort of on autopilot mode. Not that the material was bad, it was just generic rambling heat promo. And then we come back for the Rock and Roll Express versus Gary Phelps and Ed Franks, which I laughed at. Ed Franks. It is, it's not as bad as Lee Peak or Wee Willie Wilkins. God, I remember those names like it was yesterday. They did not last long. But Ed Franks, that is definitely not a name that'll make you stand out amongst the pack. At least the guy was in relatively good shape. He at least looked like he hit the gym more than 3 times a year. Unlike some of these other jelly bags I see on this show working squash matches. For example, his partner, Gary Phelps. The fans were super pro rock and roll this week. Double dropkick chants through the roof. And in addition to the mega babyface pops for Ricky and Robert here, Ricky in particular was super aggressive and rugged. He was working some handsome Jimmy Valiant offense at one point. Raking some eyes, gouging some backs. He was getting the heat in this babyface squash match. And of course they win with a double drop kick as normal. And then we come back to find out why Ricky was super aggressive this week. Explaining that Tully and Arn are out here running their mouths and riding on their high horse, so to speak. Get it? But Ricky's not just here to issue a challenge to Tully or Arn. He wants any combination of the 4 horsemen. And in exchange for a tag title shot, since Tully and Arn made their intentions clear, if they want a shot at the tag gold, then Tully needs to put up his world's television title against Ricky or Robert. Kind of an odd thing for a babyface tag team to do. We'll defend our belts, but we want a shot at your belt as an exchange. Shouldn't it be the other way around? Where the heels are the ones that are managing the stipulations? I don't know. More importantly, Ronnie Garvin came out for a promo. And I'll be damned, but the man did it again. He cut that fire babyface promo the other week, basically telling Ric Flair that he's coming for the NWA World's Heavyweight title, come hell or high water, after everything he's been through, all the challenges, all the obstacles. He's been after that belt for well over a year, and he's not about to close the chapter on this part of his career without getting that big win. It was like the single greatest moment of Ronnie Garvin's career, that one promo. And this week he came out and knocked it out of the park again. First he's joking about how he's not much of a suit-wearing guy. He's more of a boots, trunks, and taped fists kind of guy. Makes for a better fighting environment. He also vowed to be the first World's Heavyweight Champion in wrestling history to represent the people driving a pickup truck. A little bit of redneck humor never hurt anyone. He says that Flair doesn't have to give Garvin a ring on the phone to issue a challenge. Garvin's going to be right there in his face to settle the score. And this week, Garvin came to us with some footage. There was a match they aired recently between Ric Flair and Rocky King, I believe on one of the Sunday syndicated shows. And the match goes approximately 5 seconds. Flair immediately pummels and beats the shit out of Rocky. Goes over with the figure 4. Of course, using the ropes for leverage because it's Ric Flair. And he still has to cheat just to beat a ordinary, regular job guy. And while Flair refuses to break the hold, here comes Ron Garvin. And those guys end up going to town, lighting each other up with chops to the chest. Thunderous sounding chops that just rang and echoed in the room like firecrackers. And actually, I want you to think about that for a minute. Think about how fucking loud those rooms were when the fans were screaming and hollering to the top of their lungs. These chops were ear-piercing. So loud that they could be picked up on the main hard cam. That is how loud these guys hit each other. Insane. And they basically just had an impromptu street fight in the middle of a syndicated program. And Flair finally powdered, trying to avoid the knockout punch. It was a wild-ass brawl. And the whole thing was mostly just chops and stiff slaps to the neck and chest. They didn't do one offensive maneuver. Oh, no, actually, that's a lie. I think Ronnie gave Flair one military press. But the madness didn't stop there, because out come all the horsemen to try and do the 4-on-1 gang beatdown. They're stomping a mud hole in Ronnie. Finally, out come the babyface locker room to clear the ring and send the heels packing. And, you know, it's one thing for me to sit here and describe what happened. I mean, you listen to me talk about it, it doesn't sound like anything out of the ordinary from what you'd come to see on a regular episode of Raw or SmackDown or Dynamite even. And to be honest with you, you're probably right. It really wasn't anything out of the ordinary. It was a basic heat angle. But here's the catch. Because shit like this did not happen so often back in the day, because it used to be a rarity, the fact that you did not see it multiple times a week with underneath guys that you're never given a reason to care about, boy, imagine the surprise when you have a group of loyal, passionate wrestling fans screaming their heads off at a basic heat angle with top guys. The whole thing was Ronnie Garvin and Ric Flair having a Pier 6 brawl. The heels tried to come out and jump Garvin, and they got run off by some good guys. We see that every week on TV in modern wrestling. There's nothing new or innovative about it. But again, because that kind of stuff only used to happen sparingly back in the day, when you did see it, shocker, it was a big fucking deal. And like I said, they were smart enough to only do it with top guys that were actually over. That way it made a difference. They weren't doing this stuff with, I don't know, name a random pair of job guys. Larry Stevens and Big Bill Tab. No. That would have been fucking stupid. No one cares about Larry Stevens or Bill Tab. No offense, but I mean, they were what they were. They were job guys. But when you only do this stuff with the main eventers, no shit it's going to get over. What happened to this business? Oh, I know the answer. We let the marks run the ship. Biggest mistake ever. So that was part one of the video montage this week. Then we come back for some footage featuring the recent showdown between Lex Luger and Dusty Rhodes for the United States Heavyweight title. And I have no idea what live event or spot show this may have been taken from. God, was the audio fucking abysmal. The whole thing was just a string of white noise. Like, occasionally you could hear the announcers cut in and out, but a lot of it was inaudible. In any case, Dusty and Luger are doing a match. It's ghastly. Dusty in particular was sucking wind pretty badly. Think about that for a minute. Luger had the better cardio. And they do a really convoluted ref bump spot where Luger gets dumped out to the floor over the top rope. Teddy somehow got bumped beforehand. I wasn't entirely sure what even happened. All I remember is that Tommy Young was out there, and when Luger went out to the floor, he sort of grazed Tommy for a moment. And then somehow, magically, Tommy Young recovers at the opportune moment when Dusty has Luger in a cradle pin, Tommy counts the visual 3, and of course the babyfaces immediately empty out to celebrate with Dusty, thinking that he just won the U.S. heavyweight title. And of course, it's a swerve, because then Teddy gets back in the ring, and he begins arguing with Tommy, calling off the match and reversing the decision because somehow, I guess he caught Dusty throwing Luger over the top rope. How? I don't know. I mean, he was nowhere near the line of sight. And, well, then the heels just walk off with the title, and the babyfaces look on dumbfounded. Prototypical Dusty finish. But of course, that only escalates the situation, because we cut to footage immediately afterward. I believe JJ referring to this during the pitch as Dusty going into business for himself in, quote, Texas outlaw fashion. It is Dusty making a beeline for Luger's dressing room, tackling Luger to the ground, and applying a sleeper hold. Yes. That was Dusty's form of revenge after getting fucked out of the U.S. title just moments prior. He went after Luger and said, I'm going to slap on a good old-fashioned sleeper on this fucker. And this is so awesome. Dusty's laying there on the ground with Luger in the hold. You got all the baby faces standing around going, attaboy, Dusty. Ricky's hovering over him going, squeeze, Dusty, squeeze. They're egging him on to basically kill this man in broad daylight while the cameraman is filming it. I'm baffled. And when I tell you, this sleeper hold was locked in on Luger for an eternity, it may have been longer. Dusty's on the floor, and he's squeezing him, and he's squeezing him, and he's squeezing him a little harder, and he's grunting, he's wheezing. The babyfaces continue to encourage this brutal onslaught. And finally, after about a day and a half, it is JJ fucking Dillon, of all people, who casually walks over. And keep in mind, this is Luger's fucking agent we're talking about. This is not some random security geek. It's not some random official that's trying to break up this fight, trying to play a neutral party. This is the 4th and a half member of the Four Horsemen. JJ just calmly walks over. He just taps Dusty on the shoulder and goes, all right, man, I think he's had enough. He's not panicking. He's not in a rush to try and pry Dusty off this man. No, he just goes, all right, Dusty, I think you made your point. And, well, I guess that message got to Dusty, because he finally releases the hold, and he tells JJ that it ain't over. And he can deliver that message to Luger personally, if and when he ever wakes up. And of course they go back to the studio. What is JJ's major concern over Dusty's actions? Not the fact that he just choked out his agent from behind like a coward, but that he broke into the Horsemen's dressing room uninvited. That was the major concern. Was JJ secretly turning on Luger? Was that a storyline in the making that was never followed up on? I mean, I know Luger eventually splits from the Horsemen, but, we're still a little ways out from that. Am I missing something? JJ literally just watched his client get knocked unconscious in front of his face, and JJ's first concern is the fact that Dusty broke into their locker room. What a dick. If I were Luger, I'd have punched that man right in the face. So after JJ rakes Dusty over the coals for using an illegal chokehold, claiming it was not a sleeper, then it's Luger's turn to speak. And his conclusion is basically, the reason Dusty attacked the hottest commodity in this sport is that he's jealous. He's jealous that Dusty will never have a body like Lex Luger. I am not kidding. That is basically what he said. The reason Dusty attacked Luger was that Dusty was mad that Luger had a great body. And, I don't know. I guess Dusty was angry that he was not born with great genetics. Leave it to the bodybuilder to come up with that conclusion. Clearly, it's not because Dusty just got fucked out of the U.S. heavyweight title. No. It's because Dusty looked at Luger's body and said, fuck. This guy has a six-pack. And that is why he targeted Luger. That is actually a great heel line, now that I think about it. But he also told Dusty that on his best day, he'll never be able to dethrone the fastest rising star in wrestling. Yeah, about that. Just wait until Starrcade, brother. Look what happens when you're working with the Booker man. Yeah, that comment. That one did not age well. So, well, then we come back for Jim Cornette. He was plugging Dragnet, which gave him the inspiration to come on TV to do a promo where he promised to speak nothing but the truth in what he coined just the facts, as opposed to all the other promos he cuts on TV where he just outright lies about everything. And he basically put over every known fact and truth about how great the Midnight Express are. And that segued right into the Midnight's match this week with Ricky Nelson and Dave Isley. Stan Lane must have really liked Ricky Nelson, because he was feeding and bumping for that guy like crazy. Ricky fucking Nelson. I mean, he wasn't a horrible-looking athlete. He was in moderately good ring shape. But I'm watching him give Stan arm drag takeovers and atomic drops. He's running wild. I'm like, did Ricky and Stan hit it off before the show? Why is Stan giving this guy so much offense? I also enjoyed Beautiful Bobby's delayed back suplex to David Isley, which perfectly allowed for Corny to do a long yeehaw on the way down. I laughed. The match went through a break, which Corny outright buried. And I think it was Dave that actually pitched the break spot this time, which is very unusual. Normally it's Tony pitching to David, and David is busy screaming through the commercial, marking out for all the moves. So they come back. The Midnights beat up on Isley for another couple of minutes. And they hit a very weird-looking double flapjack where Isley made the critical error of trying to break his fall by throwing out his hands and landing on his wrists. Don't ever do that. Bad idea. If you trip and fall on the sidewalk, do not try to put out your wrist to break your fall. Bad move. And then we go over to the booth for, I guess you would call it a special plug. A feature, if you will, for, as David Crockett noted, the Alabama Junior Heavyweight Champion, Mike Jackson. Yes, Mike Jackson got a featured plug on Crockett Television. And I like Mike Jackson. He's one of the better enhancement guys they've had on the studio shows. He can work. It's definitely a toss-up between him and George South as the two best. And again, this is around that period in the business where they were really pushing in to highlight the regional champions. I always joke about the Western States Heritage Championship and how meaningless and futile that belt was in the grand scheme of things. Nobody gives a fuck about it. I know Barry Windham has it, but let's be honest. No one cared. They have now crafted another variant of a regional belt, this time calling it the Alabama Junior Heavyweight Championship, which is beyond hilarious. Not the Northeastern Junior Heavyweight Champion or the Southeastern Junior Heavyweight Champion or the Mid-Atlantic Junior Heavyweight Champion. No, the Alabama Junior Heavyweight Champion. Because it was really important that the state of Alabama have a representative for them as a junior heavyweight champion. So, yeah, I don't know how long that belt was around, judging by the way the next segment went. I'm predicting not very long, because we cut to the ring for the next match. It is Mike Jackson with his Invisible Alabama Junior Heavyweight belt versus Tommy Angel. And I was already kind of chuckling to myself, realizing that Mike Jackson came out to the ring with no belt. And then as soon as they rang the bell, who should the fans start chanting for but Mike Jackson's opponent, Tommy Angel? And, well, here's the best part. They're wrestling for about 20 seconds. It is dead silent in the studio. No joke. You could hear pins dropping. And finally, Tony Schiavone, ever the observant play-by-play commentator, says, and I quote, "Kind of quiet out here, isn't it?" And that is when I just lost it and started cackling. That was Tony's insider way of saying, yeah, this Alabama Junior Heavyweight Championship experiment, not getting over. Nor is Mike Jackson. So they're out there doing the match. The announcers are bored beyond all hope, trying desperately to come up with anything to talk about, while these guys are out there putting each other in arm ringers for about an hour. I like the spot where Angel went to put Jackson in an armbar, and Teddy goes over to ask him if he wants to give it up. And Mike Jackson very respectfully answers, "No, sir." Very humble in his demeanor, while Angel has this armbar applied, cranking on this man's cartilage. No, Mike Jackson is a professional. "No, sir, I will not give up." I believe I also heard at one point a fan just drone underneath his breath, "We want Dusty." Exactly like that. There was no emotion. There was no passion behind the chant. It wasn't even a chant. This fan was so over this match, he just flat out said, "Dude, this sucks. Give us Dusty. Just give us something good." Luckily for him, the match was over about 10 seconds later. Jackson hit a flying crossbody attack for the 3 count. I think it's safe to say this did not work. The short-lived singles push of Mike Jackson, and that is me being kind about it. And then we got Dusty, conveniently enough. And he's basically out there to respond to Luger. He mentions how Luger commented on his body earlier. And while Dusty may never have the body of Luger, what he does have underneath that big, rotund body is the heart of a true American. Rotund. That's a word you don't hear often anymore. Not rotunda, just rotund. He also told Luger to ask guys like Ric Flair what it's like to lose championship gold to Dusty, what it's like to have nothing. He says that Luger does not have money. Dusty's grocery bills are worth more than Luger is. And while Luger's got a great body and great face, Dusty's going to rearrange that pretty boy face. And I don't entirely remember what he said at the end. Something about sticking his fingers in his nose and toes in his ears and bending him around like a human pretzel. Sounds painful. I'm going to have to start using the word rotund in my day-to-day conversations to figure out how many people actually know what that means. It's the perfect way to describe like 90% of these NWA jobbers. So then we come back for the Fabulous Freebirds versus Art Pritz and Dexter Westcott. Dexter Westcott and Art Pritz, they were, how you say, rotund. Now, it is important to note, we only had Hayes and Roberts here. No Bam Bam Gordy. He was not present at the studio. Buddy's hair was extra bleached this week. I think he was trying to go for the Michael Hayes blonde look. He did not quite reach that level, but boy did it stand out. I mean, we've been reviewing those matches on World Class through like 82, 83, and 84. His hair never looked that blonde. For the longest time, he never even had hair. After he got it shaved by the Iceman, he was basically bald for about 6 months. He had a hard time growing his hair back. It's the Kurt Angle genetics. Now he's finally starting to grow the full head of hair back, about 3 or 4 years later. So, here's everything I wrote down. Freebirds beat up the Job Guys for a while, and Michael Hayes won with a side slam. And I'm not even exaggerating. It was a basic side slam. There was no extra power. There was no momentum coming off the ropes. No. From a standing position, Hayes just grabbed Pritz and he hoisted him up and he dropped him on his back and pinned him. Clever finish. If only things were that simple anymore. And where do we go from here? Oh, yeah, that's right. I said I had a few brain farts along the way here because it's been a while since I watched the show. I do remember this. A very obscure Freebirds promo. Okay, so Hayes and Roberts are at the booth. And Hayes starts going off on something Jim Cornette commented on earlier, directed toward Terry Gordy. And I actually forgot about it until Hayes mentioned it. But then it hit me. Remember the line where Corny joked about Gordy failing a drug test? Well, Hayes was out here the following week to throw it back in his face, saying that Jim Cornette had to sit down for his urine test. Ha. Get it? Because Corny has no balls. Yeah. Inappropriate jokes on national cable television in 1987. Penis jokes at that. Some things never change, do they? And then Hayes rambled on for another minute or so. Basically said the Freebirds are back to kick ass and walk Bad Street with anybody that has the balls to get in the ring with them. Then we go back to the ring for Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert versus Alan Martin. Eddie Gilbert, also a fine talent acquisition from the UWF. Some of the earliest footage I ever saw from Eddie Gilbert was the work he did in Mid-South from like 85 or 86. Of course, that was during the downturn of the territory, so probably wasn't the best light to paint him in. Now, of course, his relationship with Crockett Promotions became a little more interesting during the buyout in 88. And I'll talk about Eddie's work later on once he becomes a more prominent figure in WCW. You know, this was another one of those deals where Crockett was slowly introducing more of the UWF talent and trying to get them a little bit of exposure in featured spots every week. Now that he bought the company and had all those names, he was basically getting as many people as he possibly could on TV to see who would stick and who wouldn't. And, you know, like I said, Eddie would become a little more prominent in about a year or two, as would guys like Dr. Death Steve Williams and Ron Simmons and Sting and guys like that. Match was okay. Kind of a showcase piece for Eddie. He went over with a stun gun. And then he did a follow-up promo talking about how he did not come to Crockett Promotions alone. He has a message directed toward Barry Windham, of all people, specifically when it comes to the topic of the first family. To which I paused and said, wait a sec. Jimmy Hart is coming to the NWA in 1987? That can't be right. Well, I do not believe he was referring to the original first family of Memphis Legacy. The names he mentioned here were some of his UWF cohorts: Dick Murdoch, Terry Taylor, and Rick Steiner. And from there, I kind of blanked out on the rest of the promo. He had like 80 different things he was trying to cover here, none of which I could follow. Something about a bull rope match with Dusty and Dr. Death. Something about a bunkhouse match with Terry Gordy. And again, what the fuck was the comment about Barry Windham? Where did that come from? That must have been a tie over from something that happened in the UWF. Because I had no idea what he was talking about. All these people Eddie Gilbert had issues with. And meanwhile, I'm apparently just expected to remember that all this shit was happening at a given time. What company does that sound like? Where we're just expected to know who guys are feuding with from other territories. Huh. Can't put my finger on it. And then we had a Midnight's promo, where Cornette was out there to plug the Midnight's next major U.S. tag title defense in Anderson, South Carolina. The long-awaited title match between the Midnight Express and the Mulkeys. Yep. That ongoing rib storyline. It is still a thing. Cornette talking about how the letters have been answered. Anderson, South Carolina. The Mulkeys' hometown. All 5,000 people that sent in letters wanting to see that major title defense. Boy. I can only hope they actually air some of that footage. Can anyone actually validate whether or not that match ever officially happened? I have to know. Especially if it was ever on syndicated television. If it was on a spot show, then fuck that noise. So then we go back to the ring for more action. In the case of, we need to kill some time for a few minutes and throw some bodies out there. So here's what they booked. Nikita Koloff and Barry Windham versus John Savage and Thunderfoot number 2. Not both of the Thunderfoots. Just number 2. There was one thing of note in this 3-minute match. The opening 30 seconds as Nikita Koloff valiantly fights to try and get Thunderfoot in an arm bar. The struggle. The amount of effort this took on Nikita's part to get this man in a fucking arm bar. You have never seen a man fight so hard in his life. Incredible. Finally, he just gave up and tackled him so Barry could get in there. And they do a few spots, and then Barry went over with the lariat. And then we come back for Dr. Death, Steve Williams versus Mike Force. What I would properly like to coin the sprint match. They told Steve, all right, bud, you got 2 minutes. Go. So, Williams bolted to the ring, immediately took Force down with a series of tackles, did about 3 or 4 power moves in a row, and then upon realizing that he used up his entire offensive arsenal in about 15 seconds, then he finally slowed things down for a little bit and started working over some body parts. All the while, David Crockett, as only David Crockett knows how to do, chimes in with some of his stellar commentary, such as, quote, "Look at his arms. They're as big as his legs." You don't say, David? Those were your contributions to the commentary in this match? The fact that Dr. Death is a huge man? I thoroughly enjoyed the spot where Dr. Death catapulted Mike Force all the way across the ring, and he actually flung him out to the floor. And then a few seconds later, Mike attempts to go for the sunset flip into the ring, as Williams just kind of looks over him and says, "I don't think so, sir." And then he hit him with a running football tackle, followed by an Oklahoma Stampede for the 3. And then we go over to the booth for another one of those, let me see how many names I can throw out there in the span of 10-second promos. By the way, this is a Dr. Death promo. He mentioned something about how he knows what real professional wrestlers look like, not those cartoon image people. That was a quote. A rather interesting way to describe the WWF roster. And he's running down Big Bubba Rogers, Eddie Gilbert, a few other names. And then he said the following: anyone that wants to try and jump on my back, I've got a dream for you. And then he walked off. That was it. And Tony just kind of held out the microphone for a few more seconds before pitching a break. Yeah. Steve Williams. He was great at a lot of things in wrestling. Promo ability, not one of them. And then Nikita and Barry were back out for a promo after commercial. At this point, I was just sort of rapid-fire listing off keywords and phrases. Nikita mentioned something about not being finished with Luger in the U.S. heavyweight title. Barry talked about the makeshift pairing with him and Nikita, and how it's left some of the managers a little off kilter. Probably wondering to themselves, where the fuck did this duo come from? That's what I was wondering. And then Barry fired off on anybody that wants a shot at the Western States Heritage title. I believe his exact quote was, "I worked very long and hard for this belt." Yeah, I'll bet. Quite the long, treacherous road for Barry Windham to become the regional Western States Heritage Champion. And then for our TV main event, another case of me just being totally fed up with the show and wanting it to be over. It is Ivan Koloff in the Bar Bearing versus Keith Patterson and Matt McGiver. The fuck is with these job guy names? Matt McGiver. He was given a lot of things in this match. Bad professional wrestling being the top of them. In the first 10 seconds, McGiver proceeded to fuck up a rope spot where he was supposed to take a boot from Ivan. And he just sort of walked into Ivan's boot. And then he took an over-dramatic back bump. And then he nearly botched a snapmare takeover. Think about the level of suck that goes into screwing up a snapmare. And then Barbarian tagged in and just started mutilating these guys. Throwing them around, beating the shit out of them. They took turns and tagging in and out and beat up Patterson until they finally went over with the middle rope sickle. My final note reads, 2 hours in. The final match is an Ivan Koloff match. Sponsored by the reformation of the Paul Jones Army. Kill me. And that's how the show closed out. With Paul Jones explicitly reforming the Paul Jones Army. With approximately 2 people in the group. There ain't no Tijo Gijo or Pistol Pez Watley this time. It is Ivan, the Barbarian, the Raging Bull, in name only, and Vladimir Petrov, in name only. What a faction. No wonder this group didn't last long the second go-around. This faction sucks. And just to let you know how much these guys suck, while they're out there ranting and raving about all the babyface teams, Tony Schiavone cuts them off mid-promo while they're in the middle of their dialogue, and he says, "Fans, we're out of time." Meanwhile, all three heels are screaming jumbled words into the camera. You can't pick up on a single thing they're saying, but I just wrote down in big bold letters, goofballs. That's what they look like. Ivan and Paul, they're just bantering and screaming about God knows what. Barbarian just standing there snarling with his tongue out, making a mean face because he's awesome. It's the cartoon era of Crockett Promotions all over again. We just don't have Jimmy Valiant and Big Mama to fill the gap. Now we have the second-rate Paul Jones Army knockoff. Very underwhelming. Much like how this show is very underwhelming. It's hard to imagine, considering all the name power we had on camera this week. But you know, that might be the problem. All those names, all those stars, all those talents, and they had no clue what to do with half of them. All those UWF names just showing up randomly. And they're just out there doing meaningless squashes, laying out random challenges to dudes with no context. And it's so hard to follow. You got Dr. Death Steve Williams feuding with Eddie Gilbert, while at the same time Eddie's challenging Barry Windham and Dusty Rhodes, while at the same time Barry's challenging Arn Anderson and several other guys. Now he's just randomly teaming with Nikita Koloff. You think this show could be any more of a clusterfuck? Good Lord. This is like AEW on steroids. They got 1,500 fucking people on this show right now, and they have no idea what to do with any of them. Unless you're in the Four Horsemen. In that case, you're well protected. But, yeah. It's a very UWF heavy show. I just don't think it came off like they were expecting it to. It's just too many bodies. The booking and the layout of the stories are all dispersed right now. Everybody's mad at somebody, and I mean, I'm not saying it's a problem to do layered storylines, because that's been a mainstay of Crockett Promotions for a long time. There have been guys that were feuding over multiple issues at a given moment. But this is just, it's too scattered. Nothing's contained. It's one thing to have a few layered stories, but God, you need a fucking Rosetta Stone to decipher who's feuding with who right now. It's too much. Too much going on. Too many cooks, not enough entree. That's what hit me watching this one. And that brings us to World Class, which is almost kind of the polar opposite of what I just said about the talent pool in Crockett Promotions in 87. This show is an example of not enough cooks, nothing resembling an entree, or at least with very few expectations to the role. Funny enough, this was actually a much better show than normal. I actually wrote something in my notes here, a very important bullet point, and I can't remember where I jotted it down, but I basically said, this harkened back to some of those early to mid 83 shows we reviewed last year when the product was really hot. And I will admit, while I wasn't a fan of everything I saw this week, there was just something about the show that seemed like they were trying to course correct a little bit. There was less filler, if you know what I mean. Now, the main event sucked. I'll talk about that later on. And yes, the opener was another missing link squash, and those are never fun to watch. But as we kind of established last week, the Devastation Inc. crew are kind of at the forefront as the main heels. You know, the Freebirds are already kind of on their way out for a brief period, and it basically left the Von Erichs with no top heels to feud with, outside some of the stuff Kerry was doing with Gino Hernandez. So, while the Devastation Inc. thing is not really my cup of tea, they are sort of the only options we have at the moment for top heels. And even so, a lot of that stuff got put on the back burner this week. It was a very wrestling-heavy show. Not a lot of pre-tapes or angles, which is fine. Yeah, again, World Class has a tendency to go back and forth depending on where they are in the taping schedule. The opener, like I mentioned, was a missing link squash, but he at least had a semi-quality opponent this time. He wrestled George Weingroff. And before I go into anything here, I have to say, hearing Bill Mercer attempt to explain the backstory of Missing Link's hometown, being that he was from lands unknown, hysterical. He also all but said that the missing link has an extra chromosome. Not kidding. Gotta love politically incorrect statements. Beyond that, it is every missing link squash you've ever seen. His entire offense is headbutts and running around the ring like he's trying to hold in diarrheal explosion. Every time he takes a bump, he's stiff as a fucking board. He's got that Mongo type of selling, which is not a compliment, by the way. George got about 15 seconds of offense before he got cut off. And then finally, Missing Link won with a falling headbutt off the middle rope. On a scale of bad to wretched, this was somewhere in the middle. So terrible. And then we came back for our second match, which was kind of a nice surprise. It's Buck Zumhoff and Mike Reed versus the team of Coco Ware and Norvell Austin. You may better know them as the Pretty Young Things, if you know your territorial wrestling history. Apparently also their Dallas debut, even though they were already an established tag team for about a year and a half. Now, I would be lying to you if I said that I remember everything about the PYTs from start to finish. I know they were around multiple territories. I think I actually first caught a bit of their work in Memphis right before they went to Mid-South, and was it 84 or 85? I think it was 85. You know, and then I saw some of the later work when they wrestled down in Florida, and I think that was one of the last locations they were before the team split off, and then Coco went to the WWF, and Vince saddled him with a Birdman gimmick. Can't remember what happened to Norvell. I can confidently say, though, as we progress through the timeline here in the classic wrestling archives, the names are starting to become a little more familiar. I at least knew who Coco and Norvell were. I was like, oh yeah, the PYTs. I remember them. Not like some of these earlier cats, the rock and roll Buck Zumhoffs of the world. They first show up and I'm like, who the fuck is that? Never heard of them. It was a solid little tag match, though. Took a while to get going, but after the heels finally took control and got the heat, the action was a lot better, because Coco and Norvell were clearly the superior workers. That was probably the most frustrating part about watching the match, actually, was having to watch the heels sell for the babyface's hideous offense for like the first 5 minutes. But they end up building to a hot tag, so Zumhoff could make the brief comeback. Whatever it is that Buck Zumhoff did, there was something resembling wrestling moves in there. It's hard to tell with a lot of his wacky gestures. I like when Reed got the initial tag, and Buck's first move, not immediately try to throw some punches to the heels. No, he gets in the ring, and he does a standoff with the PYTs. He does the put up your dukes motion with his fists as he's bouncing up in the air, which prompts the heels to then cower in fear. Gotta love wacky pro wrestling logic. So, Zumhoof's running wild. He did about 50 body slams to the heels until finally they had a miscommunication spot where Coco knocked Norvell off the apron. It eventually broke down into the four-way. Norvell caught Mike Reed in a standing bear hug. I love this finish. While Norvell has Reed in a bear hug, Coco comes off the middle rope with a clothesline. And while the heels are going for the pin, Buck Zumhof walks into the ring, proceeds to walk past Norvell Austin, who currently has a pin on Zumhof's tag partner, and then Bronco just counts to 3, while Zumhof has to pretend like he did not just see his partner get pinned. I was just shaking my head. Like, did Buck just not give a fuck? Or was he literally blind? I mean, George Weingroff was legally blind, but he could have even seen that coming. No, Buck Zumhof just walked right past it. He's like, oh, look at that. My tag partner is getting pinned. Oh well, gotta grab my paycheck. Aside from that goofy spot, it was a fun tag match. I'm not really sure how much involvement the PYTs had in World Class. Considering how much they moved around throughout their tenure, I imagine they probably popped in for a short window and then they were gone. They were definitely not a stable of World Class. Probably could have used them more often, considering they were actually a good tag team. And especially considering the talent pool they had to work with. Speaking of such, this is the point in the show where they announced that they had to change the originally planned main event. It was supposed to be Gino wrestling Kevin von Erich, but due to travel issues, Kevin was not able to make the show. So they made the executive decision to replace Kevin with, of all people, his brother, Mike von Erich, in the main event. Yee. We'll get to it. I was fixing to poon it, but I at least want to try to be a little objective. It was not all bad. Just the finish that was particularly putrid. We did have a Buddy Roberts versus Jules Strongbow match, which was mid. It's funny. I watched the match. I believe runtime they said was 12 minutes and 15 seconds. Swear to God, it felt like an hour. And here's the bigger issue. It was a match that not only went on forever, but there was so little that actually happened. I wrote down virtually nothing about the match. Strongbow cranked on Buddy's arm for about 45 minutes. Buddy cut him off momentarily, which prompted the Dallas faithful to start a war cry chant. Buddy continued to work over Strongbow for about another year and a half. I think I fell asleep. And then Strongbow was able to fire a comeback and beat Buddy with a tomahawk chop. Repulsively boring. And then we got the main event. For the American Heavyweight title, Gino Hernandez defending against substitution opponent Mike von Erich. Because in addition to Kevin being stuck in Phoenix, I don't know where Kerry was. I guess he came down with a bad case of diarrhea and he couldn't wrestle either. And I guess because all the other baby faces on the roster were locked in a broom closet. That is the only explanation I can think as to how, of all guys on the roster, they said, who would be the best substitution for Kevin? I know. Let's go with Mike von Erich. That totally won't suck a cock. And to my utter surprise, the match did not totally suck. Don't get me wrong. It was not good. Mike von Erich sucks. He's greener than a fucking pepper tree. Which basically left Gino in the unfortunate position to have to carry this entire thing and bump around like a pinball to try to get it over. What really sucked was the finish. I'll get to that momentarily. This was every over-exaggerated Gino Hernandez match where he's out there having to tune up the wackiness just to even try to make it remotely passable. Of course, that's what made Gino amazing. The fact that he could pull a decent match out of Mike von Erich. And they kind of work it like you would expect. Gino knew Mike was the less experienced Von Erich brother, so he went in underestimating Mike from the get-go, and it quickly blew up in his face when Mike was, cough, cough, running wild. Gino was able to cut him off with a few nice vertical suplexes. There was a spot somewhere where he tried a leapfrog, and Mike just kind of stopped in his tracks and forgot what to do. I don't know if that was a miscue or if Gino just didn't really clarify what the spot was supposed to be. But I always love that botched spot where a guy completely blanks out on what he's supposed to do, so he just freezes in time and stands there like a dipshit. I mean, you got to feel bad in some cases, but it is kind of funny. But the main talking point is the finish. And boy, when you want to talk about wet cock finishes, this one. This was dick. Now, let us begin with the first issue. Either I haven't been paying close enough attention to this program in the last 2 weeks, or something happened off camera during another taping that we never saw air on television. Because all of a sudden, while Gino is going up top to hit his flying elbow drop on Mike, he stops climbing so that he can look over at the timekeeper's table and... Well, the problem is, I don't even know what the fuck was supposed to happen. Apparently there was something that happened between him and Stella Mae French. I don't know what. I don't know how. When, where, why, etc. But all of a sudden, those two are now apparently feuding. But here's the kicker. It turns out that this blonde woman at ringside wasn't actually Stella Mae French. It was apparently a decoy. Or maybe a better guess, Gino Hernandez is a fucking moron and he can't tell the difference between what Stella looks like versus a generic blonde woman that shows up at ringside. So he was hallucinating. The story is that he was on LSD I don't know. So they do this dumb angle as a distraction spot so that Mike von Erich can roll up Gino in a schoolboy and pin him. They had Mike von Erich win the American Heavyweight Championship from Gino Hernandez via female distraction spot, where the heel could not distinguish between a mystery blonde woman and Stella Mae French. Am I just totally out to lunch? Or was that not exactly what fucking happened? Wrestling historians, fill me in as to what I'm neglecting to mention here. This all just virtually came out of nowhere. And Gino really hadn't had much of a title reign before dropping at the mic. You know, they were running with the story of him being a dual champion, holding the American and Texas heavyweight title at the same time. I don't think we ever actually saw him with both belts in the same room. Now, for literally no reason, they decide to do a random belt swap onto Mike von Erich, of all fucking people, via screwjob roll-up. Yeah. Well, that didn't work. Mike didn't even sell the title win like it mattered. He just kind of held the belt up and looked blank. It's like the only facial expression Mike has. Blank, emotionless, devoid of character. I don't know. I mean, I'm seeing this unfold firsthand, and my memories of world class are already kind of scant to begin with. My presumption is that the title reign is short-lived. You know, it's the old slip on a banana peel finish, so I'm thinking it's not going to be a long-standing title reign. I'm just worried we're going to have to hear Mike try and cut a promo. And yeah, that doesn't sound like a good time. If there's one thing that's worse than watching Mike wrestle, it's hearing him open his mouth. So we'll see what they do as a follow-up. As noted, I mean, the show definitely reverted back to more of a grassroots world-class episode. There were definitely things to like here. I mean, I can at least appreciate the effort of trying to do something shocking as a TV finish. But, you know, one thing world class doesn't do a lot of is surprises or shocking angles. So, while Mike beating Gino for the American heavyweight title was kind of a hot shot booking decision, I can't say it wasn't shocking. I can also make the valid argument. If somebody walks down to the ring, pulled their pants down, and took a shit, sure, it would be shocking. But do the people actually want to see that? That is another matter entirely. But you can all have that conversation in your free time. For now, I'm going to wrap this one up and try to get the editing going because I do still have to watch Retro Raw, and I usually do that on Fridays, but I might have to push that tomorrow, or until tomorrow, because I also have to watch SmackDown, so it'll be a busy Saturday for me. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. Appreciate you tuning in. Again, you can comment, rate, subscribe, do all that fancy business on YouTube. Whatever the equivalent of that is on Rumble, I still don't even know. But follow me on both platforms, and catch you guys on Monday for the SmackDown, Retro Raw, and AEW Collision Rundown. And then we'll play things by ear as we approach the Wembley show. Gonna kind of have to see how I want to go about formatting that. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care. Peace out.